A desperate man paid $800 for a crumbling hut on a cliff that locals called cursed, only to discover beneath its rotting floors a hand-carved tunnel system hiding $265 million in lost treasure that powerful people had killed to protect. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The mountain wind howled through Pinewood Ridge like it was trying to warn everyone who'd listen. Marcus Brennan stood outside the real estate office, his calloused hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was 38 years old, but the lines around his eyes made him look older. Life had a way of carving its lessons deep into a man's face, especially when that man had lost everything twice and was still standing. The wooden sign above the office door creaked on rusty hinges, the paint so faded you could barely make out the words anymore. Inside, a woman named Patricia Mills sat behind a desk that looked older than the building itself. She'd been selling property in this corner of Colorado for 43 years, and in all that time, she'd never seen anyone stupid enough to buy what Marcus was about to buy. Marcus pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling above his head. Patricia looked up from her paperwork, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed like a mother about to watch her son make a terrible mistake. "You're actually going through with this?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've got the cash." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, worn and weathered like everything else he owned. Inside was $800 in 20s and 10s, money he'd saved from 3 months of carpentry work, odd jobs, and one weekend helping old man Henderson rebuild his barn. It was every spare dollar he had to his name. Patricia counted it slowly, her arthritic fingers handling each bill like it was evidence in a crime she was witnessing. When she finished, she looked up at him one more time. "Marcus, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm telling you, that cliff hut isn't worth the wood it's built from. People have been trying to tear it down for 20 years, but nobody wants to risk going up there. The access road washed out in 2003. The foundation's probably cracked, and folks around here say it's got a darkness to it." Marcus had heard the stories. Everyone in Pinewood Ridge had. The hut had been built sometime in the late 1800s by a prospector whose name nobody remembered. He'd supposedly gone mad up there, talking to shadows and scratching symbols into the walls. When they found him 3 years later, he was dead, frozen solid in the middle of summer. The coroner never could explain that. After that, the place changed hands 7 times. Each owner either abandoned it within months or met with some kind of misfortune. One fell off the cliff, another went bankrupt, a third simply disappeared. By the time Marcus heard about it, the property had been sitting vacant for 16 years, slowly rotting into the mountainside. But Marcus wasn't superstitious. He believed in broken floorboards and bad luck, not curses, and more importantly, he needed a place to live. "I appreciate the concern, Patricia," he said quietly, "but I know what I'm doing." She shook her head, signed the deed transfer, and slid it across the desk. "Your funeral, honey. Literally." Marcus took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his jacket. He shook her hand, thanked her, and walked out into the sharp November air. Behind him, through the window, he could see Patricia watching him go, her expression somewhere between pity and disbelief. He climbed into his Ford pickup, a 2006 model with more rust than paint and an engine that sounded like it was coughing up lung tissue. In the passenger seat sat his son, Ethan, 15 years old, skinny as a rail, with his mother's dark hair and Marcus's stubborn jaw. The boy had his headphones in, staring out the window at nothing in particular. Marcus started the engine. It took 3 tries. "We get it?" Ethan asked, pulling one earbud out. "We got it." Ethan didn't smile. He rarely did anymore. Not since his mother left 4 years ago, and definitely not since they'd lost the house in Denver 6 months back. The bank had taken everything. The 3-bedroom ranch Marcus had built with his own hands, the workshop, the tools, the life they'd constructed together. Foreclosure was a cold, impersonal word for the kind of devastation it left behind. Marcus had tried to hold on. He'd worked triple shifts, maxed out credit cards, sold everything that wasn't nailed down. But medical bills from his father's final year had buried them, and the construction business he'd been building went under when the economy tanked. One day they had a home. The next, they were living in the truck. For 6 months, they'd bounced between shelters, cheap motels, and the couches of friends who could only help for so long. Marcus had kept working, kept pushing, kept his son fed and in school. But the weight of it, the shame, the exhaustion, had pressed down on him like a mountain he couldn't move. Then one day, a guy at the lumber yard mentioned the cliff hut, said it was going for nothing, said it was a death trap, said nobody in their right mind would touch it. Marcus had driven up the next morning to see it for himself. The road to the hut was exactly as bad as Patricia had warned. It wasn't really a road anymore, more like a suggestion of where a road used to be. The truck bounced and rattled over rocks and ruts, branches scraping both sides like skeletal fingers trying to pull them back. Ethan gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Marcus kept his eyes on the path ahead. "No, but we're doing it anyway." They climbed higher into the Rockies, the air thinning, the trees thickening. Pine and aspen crowded the slopes, and somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried out. The sky above was the kind of blue you only see at altitude, so deep it almost hurt to look at. After 20 minutes of crawling upward, the path opened into a small clearing. And there it was. The cliff hut sat perched on the edge of a sheer rock face, its weathered logs dark with age and moisture. It was small, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with a sloped roof covered in moss and pine needles. One wall leaned slightly outward, like it was considering whether to jump. The windows were boarded up with planks that had warped over the years, and the front door hung crooked on rusted hinges. But what stopped Marcus's breath wasn't the hut itself. It was the view. Beyond the structure, the cliff dropped away into a valley so vast and beautiful it looked like something out of a dream. Mountains rose in every direction, their peaks dusted with early snow. A river wound through the valley floor far below, silver and serpentine, and above it all, the sky stretched, endless and clean. Marcus stepped out of the truck slowly. The wind up here was different, sharper, colder. It carried the scent of pine resin and stone. He walked toward the hut, his boots crunching on loose gravel. Ethan followed a few paces behind, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "It looks like it's about to fall off the mountain," Ethan said. "Probably." "And we're going to live here?" Marcus turned to look at his son. The boy's face was guarded, defensive. He'd stopped trusting his father's decisions somewhere around the 3rd eviction notice. "We're going to fix it up," Marcus said. "Make it safe. Make it ours." Ethan kicked at a rock. "People at school are going to think I live in a haunted shack." "Let them think what they want." Marcus approached the front door. The wood was solid, surprisingly so. He tested the handle. Locked. He pulled a key from his pocket, the one Patricia had given him, and slid it into the old iron lock. It turned with a grinding click. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. Inside, the hut was dark and cold. Marcus pulled a flashlight from his belt and flicked it on. The beam cut through shadows thick as smoke. Dust hung in the air like fog. The floor was made of wide planks, hand-hewn and ancient. Some had rotted through in places, revealing dirt and stone beneath. The walls were bare logs, fitted together with the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore. and in the far corner, a stone fireplace stood like a silent sentinel, its hearth black with decades of soot. But there was something else, something Marcus noticed immediately. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. He stepped inside carefully, testing each board before putting his full weight down. Ethan stayed in the doorway, silhouetted against the brightness outside. "Smells like something died in here," the boy muttered. Probably did. Marcus swept the flashlight across the room. There wasn't much. A broken chair in one corner, a rusted pot hanging from a hook near the fireplace, some shredded fabric that might have been curtains once. But the bones of the place were good. The logs were solid. The roof, despite the moss, wasn't leaking. And the stone foundation, built directly into the cliff itself, looked like it had been there since the mountains first rose. He knelt down, running his hand along one of the floorboards. The wood was old-growth pine, dense and heavy. His fingers traced the grain, feeling the story of decades written in knots and whorls. That's when he noticed it. The board was loose, not rotted, not broken, loose. He pulled out his utility knife and worked it under the edge of the plank. It lifted easily, revealing a gap beneath. Marcus shone the flashlight down. Dirt and stone. Nothing unusual. He was about to replace the board when something caught his eye. The dirt beneath wasn't random. It had been disturbed, shaped, smoothed, like someone had dug down and then carefully filled it back in. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked from the doorway. "Not sure yet." Marcus pried up another board, then another. Each one came up easier than it should have, as if they'd been designed to be removed. Beneath them, the pattern of disturbed earth continued. His pulse quickened. He'd been a contractor for 15 years before everything fell apart. He knew construction. He knew how floors were supposed to look. And this wasn't it. He stood up, brushing dust from his jeans. "Hand me that crowbar from the truck." Ethan hesitated. "Why?" "Just get it." The boy disappeared, and Marcus heard him rummaging through the truck bed. While he waited, Marcus tapped his boot against the remaining floorboards. Some sounded solid. Others rang hollow, like there was space beneath them. Ethan returned with the crowbar. Marcus took it, wedged it under a section of floor near the fireplace, and levered up. The boards resisted, then gave way with a crack of splitting wood and old nails pulling free. More dirt, more smooth, deliberate excavation. And then, as Marcus pulled up a fourth board, he saw it. A ring. Not a wedding ring or jewelry. An iron ring, thick as a man's thumb, set into a flat stone, buried just beneath the surface. The metal was old, pitted with rust, but still solid. And it was positioned exactly in the center of the floor, like the heart of something larger. Marcus stared at it. Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity finally overcoming his reluctance. "What is that?" "I don't know." Marcus knelt down and gripped the ring with both hands. It was ice cold, even through his work gloves. He pulled. Nothing. He adjusted his grip, planted his feet, and pulled harder. The muscles in his back screamed. His shoulders burned, and then, with a grinding sound like stone against stone, something shifted. A section of the floor, roughly 3 feet square, lifted an inch. Dust and debris cascaded into the gap. Marcus could feel air moving beneath, cold and stale, rushing up from somewhere deep below. He looked at Ethan. The boy's eyes were wide. "Dad, what is this place?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was beginning to realize that the $800 he'd just spent hadn't bought him a worthless hut on a cliff. It had bought him a secret. The first week in the hut was brutal. November in the Colorado Rockies didn't forgive weakness, and the nights dropped below freezing. Marcus and Ethan slept in their sleeping bags near the fireplace, burning what dry wood Marcus could scavenge from the surrounding forest. The chimney worked surprisingly well, drawing smoke up and out without filling the room. Another sign that whoever built this place knew what they were doing. During the day, Marcus worked. He patched holes in the walls with scraps of lumber. He replaced broken window boards with plywood from town. He reinforced sagging beams and cleared out decades of debris, mouse nests, rotted fabric, broken glass, the accumulated decay of abandonment. Ethan helped when Marcus asked, but mostly the boy kept to himself, doing homework by flashlight and counting the days until he could leave this place behind. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the iron ring. He'd covered it back up after that first day, telling himself he needed to focus on making the hut livable. But at night, lying in his sleeping bag with the fire crackling and wind howling outside, his mind kept circling back to it. Why was it there? What was beneath it? And why had someone gone to such trouble to hide it? On the 5th day, Old Man Henderson drove up the mountain. His truck was even more beat up than Marcus's, and he climbed out wheezing, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a bag of donuts in the other. "Figured you could use some supplies," he said, handing them to Marcus, "and some company that isn't a moody teenager." Marcus smiled. Appreciated. They sat on the edge of the cliff, legs dangling over nothing, eating donuts and drinking coffee while the sun burned orange across the valley. Henderson had lived in Pinewood Ridge his entire 72 years. He'd seen the town grow and shrink, watched people come and go, buried 3 wives and too many friends to count. "You settling in okay?" he asked. "Getting there." Henderson nodded, chewing slowly. "This place has a history, you know." "Patricia mentioned. She tell you about the prospector?" "Some." The old man took a sip of coffee. Name was Elias Crane. Came out here in 1876 during the silver boom. Most folks thought he was crazy. Set up this hut way out here, far from the mines, far from everyone. People said he was searching for something specific, not silver, not gold, something else. Marcus listened quietly. "Story goes," Henderson continued, "that Crane found what he was looking for, but whatever it was, it changed him, made him paranoid. He'd come into town once a month for supplies, but he wouldn't talk to anybody, just bought what he needed and disappeared back up the mountain. Then one winter he stopped coming. Search party found him the next spring, dead, and the strange thing was he'd barricaded the door from the inside, like he was trying to keep something out, or keep something in. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant snow. "You trying to scare me off?" Marcus asked. Henderson laughed, a dry sound like leaves rustling. "No, just giving you the facts. Place has had bad luck ever since. But maybe you'll be different. Maybe you're stubborn enough to change its fortune." He stood up, brushing crumbs from his jacket. "You need anything, you know where to find me." After Henderson left, Marcus went back inside. Ethan was reading a book, one of the fantasy novels he'd checked out from the library. He barely looked up when Marcus entered. Marcus walked to the center of the floor. The boards he'd replaced looked no different from the others now, but he knew what was beneath them. "Ethan," he said. The boy glanced up. "I need your help with something." Together they pulled up the boards again. The iron ring gleamed dully in the afternoon light filtering through the window. Marcus gripped it, and this time, with Ethan's help, they lifted the stone section in one smooth motion. Beneath was darkness. Marcus shone his flashlight down. Stone steps, hand-carved, descended into the earth. The walls were rough-hewn rock, glistening with moisture. The air that rose up was cold and smelled of minerals and time. "Is that a tunnel?" Ethan whispered. "Looks like it." Marcus tested the first step with his boot. Solid. He tested the second. The same. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Each step was level, each edge precisely cut. This wasn't the work of a madman scratching at stone. This was engineering. "Stay here," Marcus said. "Are you serious?" Ethan's voice cracked. "You're going down there alone. Someone has to. Then we both go." Marcus looked at his son. For the first time in months, there was fire in the boy's eyes. Not anger, curiosity, maybe even excitement. "All right," Marcus said, "but you stay close." They descended together, Marcus leading with the flashlight. The steps went down farther than he expected. 10 feet, 20, 30. The temperature dropped with each step, and condensation formed on the walls. Their breath misted in the beam of light. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across, carved directly into the mountain. The walls showed tool marks, thousands of them, the record of countless hours of labor. In the center of the room stood a wooden workbench, ancient and worn. On it lay tools, chisels, hammers, picks, all rusted but still recognizable. But what caught Marcus's attention was the wall to the left. Someone had carved symbols into the stone, not random scratches, deliberate patterns, geometric shapes, circles within circles, lines radiating outward like a sun, and words, barely legible, worn smooth by time and moisture. Marcus moved closer, trying to make them out. "What does it say?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus traced the letters with his finger. "The worthy shall find what was hidden from the wicked." A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the chamber. That's when he noticed it. The sound. He stamped his boot against the floor. It rang hollow. Marcus knelt down, running his hands across the ground. The surface was smooth stone, but there was a seam, a rectangular outline barely visible, about 3 feet by 2 feet. He looked at Ethan. "Hand me one of those chisels." The boy grabbed the least rusted one from the workbench and passed it over. Marcus worked the edge into the seam, prying gently. Stone dust fell away. He worked his way around the perimeter, loosening whatever held it in place. Finally, with a grinding scrape, the stone section lifted. Beneath was another compartment, deeper, darker. Marcus shone the light down, and his breath caught. There were steps, more steps, leading even deeper into the mountain. And from somewhere far below, so faint he almost missed it, came a sound. The whisper of moving air, like the mountain itself was breathing. Marcus stood at the edge of the second descent, his flashlight beam disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Every instinct he'd developed in 38 years of living told him to stop, to seal this back up, to walk away and pretend he'd never found it. But he didn't, because the same instinct that warned him also whispered something else, that whatever lay below had been waiting a very long time, and maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for him. "We should come back tomorrow," Ethan said, his voice tight. "With better lights, more supplies." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're right." They climbed back up to the hut, replaced the floor sections, and spent the rest of the evening in silence. But neither of them could stop thinking about what they'd found. That night, lying in their sleeping bags, Marcus stared at the ceiling beams and wondered what Elias Crane had discovered down there in 1876, and whether the madness that took him was a warning or a price. The next morning, Marcus drove into town. He bought LED lanterns, extra batteries, rope, a better crowbar, and a first aid kit. The woman at the hardware store, Ruth Ann, eyed his purchases with suspicion. "Doing some exploring?" she asked. "Just fixing up the hut." She handed him his change. "Marcus, folks around here have a saying. Some doors are closed for a reason." He pocketed the money. "Good thing I'm good with locks." Back at the hut, he and Ethan prepared. They ate a solid breakfast, checked their equipment twice, and left a note on the table just in case. At 9 in the morning, they descended into the mountain again. This time, they went deeper. The second set of stairs was longer than the first. Marcus counted 53 steps before they reached another chamber. This one was larger, more carefully constructed. The walls had been smoothed and reinforced with timber beams, dark with age but still solid. And along one wall, carved into the stone itself, was a map. Marcus approached it slowly, holding the lantern high. The map showed the mountain, the valley, the river. But it also showed something else. Lines, tunnels, a network of passages spreading through the rock like veins through flesh. "Dad," Ethan whispered, "this isn't just a hiding place. It's a whole system." Marcus traced one of the carved lines with his finger. It led from the chamber they were standing in toward the eastern face of the mountain. Another line went west. A third descended even deeper. And at the center of the map, where all the lines converged, someone had carved a single word. Vault. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at Ethan. The boy's face was pale but determined. "We keep going," Marcus said. They followed the eastern passage. It was taller here, high enough to walk upright, and wide enough for two men to pass. The walls showed the same careful craftsmanship, every surface deliberately shaped. Whoever built this had spent years, maybe decades, hollowing out the mountain. After 100 yards, the passage opened into another chamber, and this one wasn't empty. Metal containers lined the walls, dozens of them, each about the size of a footlocker. They were made of some kind of reinforced steel, sealed with heavy locks that had long since rusted through. Marcus approached the nearest one and worked the lock free with his crowbar. The lid opened with a shriek of protesting metal. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, were objects. Marcus lifted one out carefully, peeling back the fabric. It was a gold coin. He held it under the lantern light, turning it slowly. The face showed a profile he didn't recognize. The date read 1863. Ethan moved to another container and opened it. More coins, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They moved through the chamber, opening container after container. Gold coins, silver bars, jewelry, antique weapons, historical documents sealed in glass tubes. Each container held treasures that belonged in museums, not buried in a mountain. Marcus sank down onto one of the closed containers, his legs suddenly weak. His mind raced, trying to calculate, trying to understand. If each container held even a fraction of what the first few contained, they were looking at millions of dollars. Tens of millions. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was shaking. "What is all this?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it." He stood up, steadying himself. They needed to keep exploring. They needed to understand the full scope of what they'd found, because instinct told him they'd only scratched the surface. They returned to the central chamber with the map and followed another passage, this one heading west. It sloped downward, deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming pools on the floor that reflected their lantern light like scattered stars. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached another chamber, larger than the others, and filled with something different: artifacts, pottery, blankets, tools, ceremonial items, all arranged on stone shelves with the care of a museum curator. Marcus recognized some of them from documentaries he'd watched. Indigenous artifacts, Ute, Arapaho, Cheyenne, items that should have been with their people, not locked away in a mountain. And beneath each shelf, carved into the stone, were words. Marcus read them aloud. To be returned, to be honored, to be protected. Understanding began to dawn. This wasn't just a treasure vault. It was something else, something more complicated. Someone had gathered these items, these artifacts and treasures, and hidden them away. Not to keep them, to protect them. From what? From whom? They pressed on, following the passages deeper. Each chamber revealed more, documents detailing land claims, letters discussing threats and dangers, journals written in a careful hand describing the need to preserve history that others wanted erased or stolen. And finally, in the deepest chamber, they found the answer. A name carved above a doorway, the Keepers of the Last Light. Established 1874. Below it, an inscription. What was taken shall be returned. What was lost shall be found. What was silenced shall speak again. Marcus sat down heavily on the cold stone floor. Ethan stood beside him, both of them silent, overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about preservation, about people who'd spent their lives trying to right wrongs and protect what mattered. And somehow, 147 years later, a desperate man buying a worthless hut for $800 had stumbled into their secret. What happens next will turn this mountain upside down, reveal a truth that powerful people tried to bury, and remind us why sometimes the greatest treasures aren't meant to be kept, but returned. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in his sleeping bag staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying everything they'd found beneath the hut. The chambers, the artifacts, the name carved in stone, the Keepers of the Last Light. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those words glowing in the lantern light, beckoning him deeper into a mystery that had waited nearly a century and a half to be uncovered. Beside him, Ethan tossed and turned, equally restless. Finally, around 3 in the morning, the boy sat up. "Dad, we have to go back down there." Marcus turned his head. "I know. I mean now. Before sunrise. Before anyone else shows up." "Nobody knows about this, Ethan. Yet." The boy's voice was sharp, urgent. "But what if someone does? What if there are other entrances? What if we're not the first people to find this?" Marcus sat up slowly, his back aching from days of physical labor and sleeping on hard ground. His son had a point. They'd stumbled onto something extraordinary, something that people throughout history had clearly fought to protect or possess. The journals they'd found mentioned threats, dangers, people who would kill to claim what was hidden. "All right," Marcus said. "Get dressed. We go deeper." They prepared quickly, packing extra batteries, water, energy bars, and a handheld GPS unit Marcus had bought years ago for hiking trips that never happened. By 4 in the morning, they were descending into the mountain again, their headlamps cutting twin beams through absolute darkness. This time, they bypassed the chambers they'd already explored and headed for the passage marked on the stone map as leading to the vault. The tunnel here was different from the others. The walls weren't just smoothed. They were reinforced with timber supports that showed signs of professional mining techniques. Marcus recognized the pattern. Whoever dug this section knew what they were doing. They'd followed the natural weaknesses in the rock, shoring up stress points, creating a structure that could last centuries. "This wasn't built by one person," Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "This was a team, experienced miners." They walked for what felt like miles but was probably only half that distance. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes descending sharply, other times leveling out. Water trickled down the walls in places, forming small streams that disappeared into cracks in the floor. The temperature remained constant, cold but not freezing, as if the mountain itself was insulating them from the winter weather outside. After 40 minutes of steady walking, they reached a junction. 3 passages branched off in different directions. Marcus pulled out the GPS unit, marking their location, then consulted the mental image he'd formed of the stone map. "Left," he said. "That should take us toward the main vault." The left passage was wider than the others and showed more evidence of heavy use. The floor had been worn smooth in the center, as if countless feet or perhaps carts had traveled this route. Along the walls, Marcus noticed something new: markings. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols carved at regular intervals. They looked like way markers, guides for people who knew what they meant. Ethan traced one with his finger. It's like they left a code. Probably for members of their group, the Keepers. Do you think there are still Keepers? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The most recent journal entry they'd found was dated 1923, nearly 100 years ago. But that didn't mean the organization had died. It might have simply gone deeper underground, more secretive, waiting for the right time to reveal what they'd protected. They pressed on. The passage began to widen, the ceiling rising higher. Marcus could feel the space opening up around them, the way the air moved differently in larger chambers. His pulse quickened, and then they emerged into something that took his breath away. The vault. It was massive. Easily 100 feet across and 30 feet high, carved from solid rock with pillars left standing to support the ceiling. The craftsmanship was staggering. This wasn't a crude cave or hastily dug hiding place. This was architecture, engineering on a scale that seemed impossible for the time period. But what filled the chamber made Marcus's knees weak. Metal containers, hundreds of them, stacked along the walls, arranged in neat rows, each one labeled with symbols and numbers painted in white. Some were the footlocker-sized boxes they'd seen before. Others were larger, the size of steamer trunks. And in the center of the chamber stood several wooden crates, enormous things built from heavy timbers and banded with iron straps. Holy! Ethan's voice trailed off into silence. Marcus moved forward slowly, as if approaching something sacred. His headlamp swept across the containers, catching the labels. He recognized some of the symbols now from the journals they'd read. These weren't random. They were catalogued, organized, each container marked with its contents and origin. He approached the nearest metal box and examined the label. The paint had faded, but was still legible. Denver Mint, 1893, Gold Eagles, quantity 500. His hands trembled as he worked the rusted lock free. The lid opened with the same protesting shriek as before. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived more than a century, were gold coins. Hundreds of them, gleaming under his light, as if they'd been minted yesterday. Marcus lifted one out carefully. It was an American eagle, dated 1893, exactly as the label promised. The gold was pure, unblemished. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the weight of history and wealth combined. "How much is that worth?" Ethan whispered. "I don't know. Thousands, maybe. Just this one coin. And there are hundreds in just this box." They moved to the next container. More gold coins, these from 1878. The next held silver bars, stamped with assay marks. The one after that contained jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets, all carefully wrapped and preserved. Marcus worked his way down the row, opening container after container. Each one held treasures that belonged in museums or bank vaults. Confederate gold that was supposed to have been lost. Silver from mines that had supposedly run dry. Historical artifacts that scholars thought had been destroyed or stolen. But it was the wooden crates in the center that drew him most strongly. He approached the largest one, nearly 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. The wood was dark with age but solid. Iron bands held it together, secured with padlocks that were more substantial than the ones on the metal containers. Someone had wanted this sealed tight. Marcus used his crowbar to break the lock. It took several minutes of prying and leverage, his muscles straining, sweat dripping despite the cold. Finally, with a crack like a gunshot, the lock gave way. He lifted the lid. Inside, packed in straw that crumbled at his touch, were documents, hundreds of them. Legal papers, land deeds, maps, letters, all sealed in glass tubes or wrapped in layers of waxed paper. Marcus lifted one out carefully and held it under his light. It was a land deed, dated 1867, signed by territorial officials. It granted property rights to the Ute Nation for lands in western Colorado, lands that, according to the history Marcus knew, had been seized by the government years later. He opened another tube. This one contained a letter written on official stationery from the Department of the Interior, dated 1882. It detailed plans to forcibly relocate indigenous peoples and seize mineral rights on their territories. Another document showed banking records from San Francisco, 1896, listing accounts belonging to Chinese railroad workers, accounts that had supposedly been lost when those workers were driven out. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a treasure vault. It was evidence, proof of theft, fraud, displacement, crimes that had been buried by time and power. "The keepers," he said aloud. "They weren't just protecting treasure. They were preserving evidence, building a case." "Against who?" Ethan asked. "Against everyone who stole from people who couldn't fight back." He stood up and looked around the chamber with new eyes. Every container, every crate, represented a theft that had been documented and hidden away. Someone, Elias Crane and whoever else had joined his cause, had spent decades gathering proof of injustice, waiting for a time when the truth could be told without getting killed for it. Marcus moved to another section of the chamber where smaller containers were stacked. He opened one and found ceremonial items, pipes, headdresses, sacred objects that belonged to tribes who'd been scattered and destroyed. Each item had a tag tied to it with string, written in careful script, "To be returned to the people when it is safe." Another container held photographs, hundreds of them, images of families, communities, workers, people who'd been erased from official history but preserved here in silver gelatin prints. Marcus looked at their faces, stern and proud, staring into a camera lens more than a century ago, and felt a weight settle on his shoulders that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. This was responsibility, legacy, trust. He turned to Ethan. "We need to document everything, take photos, make lists. Before we do anything else, we need to know exactly what's here." They spent the next 2 hours working methodically through the vault, opening containers, photographing contents, taking notes. Marcus's notebook filled with entries. Container 12, gold coins, various dates, approximately 2,000 pieces. Container 18, silver bullion, 73 bars, 50 ounces each. Crate 4, legal documents, land deeds, Native American territories, 1860s through 1890s. Container 23, Chinese jade carvings, Buddhist statues, worker photographs. The catalogue went on, and with each new discovery, the magnitude of what they'd found grew heavier. They were deep in the back section of the vault, opening a container marked with symbols Marcus didn't recognize, when Ethan suddenly froze. "Dad, did you hear that?" Marcus stopped, listening. The mountain was silent except for the distant drip of water. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard footsteps or something moving." They stood perfectly still, barely breathing. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then Marcus heard it too. A faint sound, like stone scraping against stone, coming from one of the passages leading into the vault. His heart rate spiked. He'd assumed they were alone down here, that the entrances were sealed or hidden too well for anyone else to find. But what if he was wrong? What if someone had been watching the hut? What if there were other keepers, descendants of the original group, who knew about this place and didn't appreciate strangers trespassing. "Turn off your headlamp," Marcus whispered. They plunged into absolute darkness. Marcus's eyes strained, searching for any hint of light from the passages. His ears strained even harder, trying to locate the source of the sound. There. A faint glow, growing brighter, coming from the passage they'd entered through. Someone else was coming. Someone with a light. Marcus's mind raced. They were deep in the vault, surrounded by containers. If they stayed still and quiet, maybe whoever it was wouldn't see them. But if they were discovered, they'd be trapped with no way out except through whoever was approaching. He felt Ethan's hand grip his arm tight with fear. The light grew brighter. Footsteps, clear now, echoing off stone. Not hurried, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Marcus's hand moved to his belt, where he kept his utility knife. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. His other hand found Ethan's shoulder, squeezing gently, trying to communicate calm he didn't feel. The footsteps entered the vault. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the light source they carried. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged here. Marcus held his breath. The figure stopped in the center of the vault, their light sweeping across the containers. For a moment, they stood perfectly still, as if sensing something was wrong. Then they spoke. "I know you're in here." The voice was male, older, rough from years of cigarettes or mountain air. "Saw the fresh footprints in the tunnel. Saw where you broke the locks." Marcus's grip tightened on his knife. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice continued. "But you need to understand what you found. And you need to understand the danger you're in." Silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Marcus made a decision. He turned on his headlamp. The beam caught the man full in the face, and Marcus got his first clear look. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Weathered face, grey beard, eyes that had seen hard years. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and carried a battery-powered lantern that cast a warm glow. But what caught Marcus's attention was the patch on the man's jacket, a symbol he'd seen carved into the walls of the tunnels. A circle with radiating lines, the mark of the keepers. "You're one of them," Marcus said. The man nodded slowly. "My name is Thomas. My grandfather was Elias Crane." What happens next will reveal the true value of this mountain's secrets, introduce allies and enemies Marcus never knew existed, and force him to make a choice between wealth and something far more valuable. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Thomas set his lantern down on one of the metal containers and lowered himself onto a wooden crate with a groan that spoke of old joints and older injuries. He pulled a flask from his jacket, took a sip, and offered it to Marcus. Marcus shook his head. "Suit yourself." Thomas returned the flask to his pocket. "You're Marcus Brennan. Bought the hut 2 weeks ago for $800. It wasn't a question. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You've been watching me." Someone's always watching that hut. Has been for 140 years. We knew when you moved in. We knew when you found the entrance. We've been waiting to see what kind of man you are. "We?" Ethan spoke up for the first time. Thomas looked at the boy, his expression softening slightly. "There aren't many of us left, maybe a dozen, scattered across 3 states, descendants of the original keepers. We took an oath to protect what's down here until the time was right to reveal it." "And is it right?" Marcus asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes roaming over the stacked containers, the preserved history surrounding them. "I don't know," he admitted. "My grandfather, Elias, he believed that someday the world would be ready to hear the truth, that justice delayed wasn't justice denied, just postponed. But he died believing that. So did his son. So did dozens of others who spent their lives protecting this place. He stood up, walked to one of the containers, and laid his hand on it like he was touching something sacred. Do you know what you're looking at here, Marcus? Do you understand the magnitude? I'm beginning to. Thomas shook his head. No, you're not. Not yet. He gestured around the chamber. This vault contains evidence of the largest organized theft in American history. Gold seized from native tribes under false treaties. Silver taken from Chinese workers who built the railroads and were then driven out or killed. Land deeds proving that entire territories were stolen through fraud and violence. Documents showing government conspiracy at the highest levels. He turned to face Marcus directly. My grandfather and the other keepers spent 50 years gathering this evidence. They died protecting it. Because they knew that if the wrong people found it, everything would be destroyed. The evidence burned. The truth buried forever. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him. And you think I might be the wrong people? I think you're a desperate man who needs money. I think you have a son to raise and debts to pay. I think the temptation to sell just one of these containers, just one box of gold coins, must be overwhelming. He was right. Marcus had been thinking exactly that. One container. Enough to solve his immediate problems. Nobody would miss it. But here's what you need to understand, Thomas continued. The moment you try to sell anything from this vault, you'll attract attention, serious attention. There are people, wealthy people, powerful people, whose families were built on the theft documented here. They know about the keepers. They've spent generations hunting for this vault, and they will kill to keep these secrets buried. Ethan moved closer to Marcus. You're saying we're in danger just for being here? I'm saying you were in danger the moment you bought that hut. Thomas pulled a rolled paper from his jacket and spread it on a crate. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, Prospector Found Dead, Mysterious Circumstances. Below, it was a photograph of a man, Elias Crane. This is what they do to people who get too close, Thomas said. My grandfather didn't freeze to death naturally. He was murdered, made to look like an accident. The people who did it have descendants, and they're still watching. Marcus stared at the clipping, his mind racing. He'd thought the danger was theoretical, historical, but Thomas was telling him it was immediate and real. So what do we do? He asked. Thomas rolled up the clipping carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. You have two choices. Walk away, seal up the entrance, forget what you found, and live your life. Nobody will blame you, nobody except yourself. Or you help us finish what was started. You document everything down here. You reach out to the right people, people who can protect this evidence and use it. Historians, tribal leaders, journalists who can't be bought. You become a keeper yourself. Marcus looked around the vault again, at the containers holding stolen wealth, at the crates filled with proof of injustice, at the artifacts waiting to be returned to people who'd been robbed of their heritage. He thought about Ethan, about the life he wanted to give his son, about the values he wanted to teach him, about what kind of man he wanted to be. If I help you, Marcus said slowly, what exactly are we doing with all this? Thomas smiled, the first real warmth Marcus had seen from him. We're giving it back. Every coin, every artifact, every piece of land. We're returning what was stolen and exposing what was hidden. And the gold? The silver? The things that can't be returned to specific people? Museums, educational foundations, Native American communities, Chinese American historical societies. The value gets distributed to the descendants of those who were robbed. And us? Ethan asked. What do we get? Thomas looked at the boy with something like respect. Truth, purpose, the knowledge that you did the right thing. And yes, There's a finder's fee built into the plan. Not enough to make you rich, but enough to live on, enough to be comfortable. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding on to the fantasy of sudden wealth, of all his problems solved by buried treasure. But Thomas was offering something different. Not escape from responsibility, but a chance to be part of something meaningful. "How do we start?" Marcus asked. Thomas pulled out a satellite phone, the kind that worked anywhere, even deep in a mountain. "First, we contact the others, the remaining keepers. Then we reach out to allies we've spent decades cultivating. Lawyers, historians, people who've been waiting for this moment." He handed Marcus a worn leather journal, similar to the ones they'd found earlier. "This belonged to my grandfather. It contains everything. Names, connections, codes, everything you need to know about the keepers and our mission." Marcus took the journal reverently. The leather was soft with age, the pages dense with handwriting. "There's something else you need to see," Thomas said. "Something we haven't shown anyone in 70 years. He led them to the far end of the vault, to a section Marcus and Ethan hadn't explored yet. Behind a row of containers, hidden unless you knew where to look, was another passage, smaller than the others, almost invisible. Thomas entered first, his lantern held high. Marcus and Ethan followed. The passage twisted downward, narrow enough that Marcus's shoulders brushed both walls. After 50 feet, it opened into a final chamber. This one was different. No containers, no crates. Just a single stone pedestal in the center, and on it, a metal box unlike any of the others they'd seen. It was made of silver, ornately decorated with engravings that caught the light and threw it back in patterns across the walls. The lid was sealed with what looked like 7 different locks, each one requiring a different key. "This," Thomas said quietly, "is the heart of everything. The reason the keepers exist. The reason my grandfather spent his life in this mountain." He produced a ring of keys from around his neck, each one different, each one old beyond measure. One by one, he unlocked the 7 locks. Each click echoed in the small chamber like a countdown. The final lock opened. Thomas lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single ledger. Not ancient, not crumbling. Preserved perfectly, as if it had been placed there yesterday. Thomas lifted it out carefully and opened it to the first page. "This is the master record," he said. "Every theft, every crime, every piece of evidence in this vault is catalogued here with names, dates, amounts, and locations. It's the key to everything." He turned pages slowly. Marcus saw column after column of entries, thousands of them, each one a story of injustice, documented in meticulous detail. "My grandfather and the original keepers created this over 50 years. They interviewed survivors, gathered documents, verified every single claim. This ledger is unimpeachable proof of systematic theft on a massive scale." Thomas closed the book carefully and looked at Marcus. "With this, we can change history. We can return what was stolen. We can give voice to people who were silenced." He paused. "Or it can stay buried forever. The choice is yours." Marcus stared at the ledger, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on him. Thomas was offering him partnership in something bigger than himself, bigger than his debts, his struggles, his small life. "How much?" Marcus asked quietly. "How much is everything down here worth?" Thomas pulled a folded paper from the ledger's cover. "We had it appraised in 1953, adjusted for inflation and current gold prices." He unfolded the paper. $265 million, give or take. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. $265 million. Enough to solve every problem Marcus had ever had. Enough to give Ethan the life he deserved. Enough to never worry about money again. But it wasn't his. It never had been. Marcus looked at his son. Ethan was staring at him, waiting to see what kind of man his father really was. "We do this right," Marcus said. "We do what the keepers intended. We give it back." Thomas's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. He extended his hand. "Welcome to the last light, Marcus Brennan." Marcus shook it, feeling the calluses of another working man, another person who'd chosen purpose over profit. "Now comes the hard part," Thomas said. "Now we tell the world." The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Marcus met Thomas in the vault. He was in town picking up supplies when he noticed a black SUV parked outside the hardware store. Nothing unusual about that, except it had Montana plates and tinted windows dark enough to hide whoever sat inside watching. Marcus loaded his truck bed with lumber and roofing materials, trying to act normal while his skin crawled with the sensation of being observed. When he climbed into the cab, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The SUV was still there, engine running, exhaust curling into the cold morning air. He drove back to the mountains slowly, taking turns he didn't need to take, doubling back twice. The SUV followed at a distance, never close enough to be obvious, but never far enough to lose sight of him. By the time Marcus reached the winding road up to the hut, his hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The SUV stopped at the base of the mountain and didn't follow further. But the message was clear. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Marcus found Thomas waiting at the hut when he arrived. The old man stood on the cliff edge, binoculars trained on the valley below. "Black SUV," Thomas said without turning around. "Saw it follow you from town." "Who are they?" "Could be anyone. Treasure hunters, private collectors, or worse." "What's worse than treasure hunters?" Thomas lowered the binoculars and turned to face Marcus. His expression was grim. The descendants, the families who built their wealth on what's buried in this mountain. They've had people watching Pinewood Ridge for generations, waiting for someone to find the vault. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How did they know so fast? They didn't. They've probably been watching since you bought the hut. Same as we have. The question is what they'll do now that they know you've found something. Over the next week, the surveillance intensified. More vehicles appeared in town, all with out-of-state plates. Marcus recognized faces he'd never seen before, people who didn't belong in a small mountain community. They asked questions at the diner, at the gas station, at the post office. Casual questions about the new guy living in the old cliff hut. Questions about what he was doing up there all alone. Ruth Ann at the hardware store pulled Marcus aside one morning. "You got trouble following you, son. 3 different men came in yesterday asking about your purchases. Wanted to know if you'd been buying mining equipment, excavation tools, that sort of thing." "What did you tell them?" "Told them to mind their own damn business." She fixed him with a stern look. "But Marcus, whatever you're into up there, it's stirring up a hornet's nest. People in this town are starting to talk." They were. Marcus could feel the shift in how folks treated him. Some were curious, leaning in with questions disguised as friendly conversation. Others were hostile, their eyes hard when he passed. The town was beginning to divide before Marcus had even revealed what he'd found. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was working on the hut's roof when he heard the sound of engines. Multiple engines coming up the mountain road. He climbed down from the ladder and watched as a convoy of 3 vehicles crested the ridge. 2 SUVs and a van, all black, all expensive. They parked in a semicircle facing the hut. Doors opened. 7 people emerged, 5 men and 2 women, all dressed in business casual clothes that looked absurd in the wilderness setting. One of the men, tall and silver-haired, stepped forward carrying a leather briefcase. "Marcus Brennan?" His voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice used to getting what it wanted. "Who's asking?" "My name is Richard Donovan. I represent the Western Historical Preservation Society. We have reason to believe you've discovered historical artifacts on this property. Marcus kept his face neutral. This is private property. Indeed it is, which is precisely why we're here. Donovan opened his briefcase and produced a sheaf of documents. We've filed a claim with the State Historical Commission asserting that any artifacts found on this land are subject to seizure under the Antiquities Protection Act of 1906. He held out the papers. Marcus didn't take them. We have no interest in causing you trouble, Mr. Brennan. In fact, we're prepared to offer you a finder's fee. $50,000 for your cooperation in turning over anything you may have discovered. I haven't discovered anything. One of the other men, shorter and heavier with a scar running along his jaw, stepped forward. We know about the tunnel. We know about the vault. We have sources. Marcus's mind raced. How did they know? Had someone talked? Had they been inside somehow? Donovan raised a hand, stopping the scarred man from saying more. Mr. Brennan, let's not play games. We're offering you a generous settlement, but if you refuse, we have legal authority to excavate this property ourselves. We'd prefer to do this cooperatively. Get off my land. The words came out harder than Marcus intended. Donovan's pleasant expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Donovan carefully returned the documents to his briefcase and snapped it shut. We'll be in touch, Mr. Brennan, through our attorneys. He paused at the door of his SUV. And Mr. Brennan? I'd be very careful about who you trust. This mountain has a history of accidents. They drove away, leaving Marcus standing in a cloud of dust and dread. That night, Marcus sat Ethan down and told him everything. Not just about the vault and the treasure, but about the danger, about the people circling, about the choice they were facing. We could still walk away, Marcus said. Thomas would understand. We could seal it up, move somewhere else, start over. Ethan was quiet for a long time, staring into the fireplace where flames danced and crackled. Finally, he spoke. What would Mom have done? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Ethan rarely mentioned his mother, the woman who'd left them when the money ran out and life got hard. But Marcus knew what she would have done. She would have taken the easy path, the profitable path. Your mom would have sold it, Marcus admitted. Then we do the opposite. Ethan looked at his father, and Marcus saw something new in his son's eyes. Determination, strength. We do what's right. Marcus pulled his son into a hug, fighting back tears. When did you get so smart? Had a good teacher. The legal battle began the next morning. Marcus received a certified letter from Donovan's attorneys demanding access to the property for historical assessment. Attached were court documents showing that the Western Historical Preservation Society had filed an emergency injunction claiming ownership of any artifacts found on state land within the county. Marcus called the one lawyer in Pinewood Ridge, a man named Carl Hastings, who specialized in property disputes and DUIS. Carl read through the documents, his frown deepening with each page. This is complex, he said finally. They're claiming the land was originally part of a territorial grant that never properly transferred to private ownership. If they're right, anything found here could be considered state property. But I own the land. I have a deed, which they're challenging. And Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. They've got resources I can't match. High-powered attorneys from Denver, expert witnesses. This could drag on for years. I don't have years. Carl leaned back in his chair. Then you need to get your own experts. Historians who can verify the provenance of what you've found. Archaeologists. And you need media attention, public pressure. Make it too expensive for them to steal this out from under you. Marcus left Carl's office feeling like he was drowning. He had no money for expert witnesses, no connections to historians or media. He was just a carpenter trying to do the right thing against people with unlimited resources. But Thomas had connections. Over the next week, the old man worked his network. He contacted descendants of the original keepers scattered across the West. He reached out to tribal elders who'd been waiting generations for proof of theft. He called journalists who specialized in historical fraud and government corruption. And slowly, carefully, they began to build a case. But while they worked, the threats escalated. It started with phone calls. Anonymous voices leaving messages warning Marcus to stop digging and mind your business. Then came letters slipped under his door, typed messages with no signature. Accidents happen in the mountains, especially to people who don't know when to quit. Marcus bought a shotgun and started sleeping lighter. The worst came on a Friday afternoon when Ethan was walking home from the school bus stop. Marcus got the call from Sheriff Anderson. "Your boy's okay," Anderson said quickly. "But we had an incident." Marcus's heart stopped. "What kind of incident?" "Two men in a pickup tried to talk to him, offered him a ride. When he refused, they got aggressive. Started asking questions about what you'd found up at the hut." "Where is he?" "At my office. Safe." "But Marcus, this is escalating. These people, whoever they are, they're targeting your son." Marcus made it to town in record time, his truck screaming down the mountain road at dangerous speeds. He found Ethan sitting in Anderson's office, pale but unharmed. The boy stood when Marcus entered and fell into his father's arms. "I didn't tell them anything," Ethan said, his voice muffled against Marcus's chest. "I just ran." Marcus held his son tight, rage and fear warring in his chest. This had gone too far. Whatever he'd found in that mountain, it wasn't worth Ethan's safety. But when he tried to say so, when he tried to tell Ethan they were done, that they'd walk away, the boy pulled back and shook his head. "No, Dad. That's what they want. They want to scare us off so they can take everything and bury it again." Ethan's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "Grandpa didn't raise you to be a quitter, and you didn't raise me to be one either." Sheriff Anderson, listening from his desk, cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Marcus, I'd like to know what's going on, official-like." Marcus made a decision. He told Anderson everything about the vault, the treasure, the keepers, the evidence of historical theft, all of it. The sheriff listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Marcus finished, Anderson was quiet for a long moment. "That's a hell of a story," he said finally. "And if it's true, it explains why these people are so aggressive." He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the main street of Pinewood Ridge. "This town's been dying for 20 years. Population down to 800. Businesses closing, young people leaving. But if what you're saying is real, if there's historical significance up there, it could change everything." "Or it could tear the town apart," Marcus said. "Maybe. People are already choosing sides. Some folks think you're trying to get rich off treasure that doesn't belong to you. Others think you're being harassed by outsiders who want to steal your discovery. What do you think?" Anderson turned from the window. "I think you bought that land fair and square. I think whatever you found is yours by right. And I think anyone threatening a 15-year-old boy needs to be put in a cell." He pulled out a notepad. "Give me descriptions of these men who approached Ethan. I'm going to find them and have a conversation they won't forget." But finding them proved harder than expected. The men had vanished. The pickup they'd driven had Montana plates that turned out to be stolen. Every lead went cold. Meanwhile, the pressure from Donovan's organization increased. They filed additional legal motions. They contacted state officials, requesting an investigation. They even reached out to the media, but their media, painting Marcus as a reckless treasure hunter, destroying historical sites. The town meeting was called for the following Monday. The community center was packed, standing room only, with tensions running high. Marcus stood at the front of the room with Thomas beside him, while angry voices shouted questions and accusations. "You're bringing criminals to our town!" "This is about greed, plain and simple. Why should you profit from something that belongs to everyone?" But other voices rose in his defense. The man bought the land legally. "Those outsiders don't give a damn about Pinewood Ridge." "Let him speak." Marcus waited for the noise to die down, then stepped to the microphone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "I didn't come here looking for treasure," he began. "I came here desperate, broke, trying to give my son a roof over his head. When I found what's under that mountain, I could have kept quiet, could have sold it piece by piece and solved all my problems." He paused, looking around the room at faces both hostile and sympathetic. "But that's not what this is about. What I found isn't just gold and silver. It's evidence. Proof of crimes committed against people who couldn't fight back. Native Americans whose land was stolen. Chinese workers who were robbed and murdered. Families displaced by fraud and violence." The room had grown quiet. The people who hid that evidence, they called themselves the keepers of the last light. They spent their lives protecting it, waiting for a time when the truth could be told without getting them killed, and they died protecting it. Marcus gestured to Thomas. This man's grandfather was one of them, Elias Crane. The prospector everyone thought went mad. He wasn't mad. He was brave. And now we have a choice. We can let people like Richard Donovan and his society take control of this evidence, bury it again, make sure the truth stays hidden. Or we can stand together and make sure it sees the light. He took a breath. "I'm not keeping the treasure. It's going back to the people it was stolen from. Every artifact, every coin, every piece of land. But I need your help. I need this town to stand with me against people with money and power who want to steal this one more time." The silence stretched. Then, from the back of the room, Old Man Henderson stood up. "I'm with you, Marcus. Whatever you need." Ruth Ann from the hardware store stood next. "Me too." One by one, people rose, not everyone. Some remained seated, arms crossed, skeptical or hostile, but enough stood that Marcus felt hope kindle in his chest. The vote was called. By a margin of 62 to 38, the town voted to support Marcus's claim to the property and oppose the Western Historical Preservation Society's attempt to seize it. But votes didn't stop bullets. The attack came 2 nights later. Marcus was alone at the hut. He'd sent Ethan to stay with Henderson for safety when he heard vehicles approaching. He grabbed his shotgun and moved to the window. 4 trucks this time, not the polished SUVs of Donovan's people. These were rusted pickups and off-road vehicles, the kind treasure hunters used, the kind that could navigate rough terrain and disappear without a trace. Men piled out, maybe a dozen of them, carrying flashlights and tools and guns. The scarred man from Donovan's first visit was with them, along with others Marcus recognized from around town, locals, people who'd voted against him at the meeting, people who'd decided that treasure was worth betraying their neighbor. "We know you're in there, Brennan," the scarred man shouted. "We just want to talk." Marcus chambered a shell in the shotgun, the sound loud in the quiet hut. "Then talk from where you are. Come on now. Be reasonable. We're not here to hurt you. We just think you're being selfish. That treasure should be shared with folks who've lived here their whole lives, not handed over to some Indians who died 100 years ago." Marcus felt rage rise in his throat. "Get off my property." "Can't do that. See, we've got a problem. You're standing between us and something valuable, and we're not leaving without it." They started moving toward the hut, spreading out, surrounding it. Marcus backed toward the trap door that led to the vault. If he could get below, he could seal the entrance, trap them outside while he found another exit. Thomas had mentioned there were multiple entrances to the tunnel system. But before he could move, one of the men threw something through the window. It bounced across the floor, smoking. Tear gas. Marcus's eyes immediately started burning. His throat seized. He stumbled toward the door, half blind, choking. He burst outside and someone hit him from the side, tackling him to the ground. His shotgun went flying. Hands grabbed him, dragged him toward the cliff edge. Through watering eyes, Marcus saw the scarred man standing over him. "Here's how this is going to work," the man said. "You're going to show us everything down there, every chamber, every container, and then you're going to sign a document saying you're selling the property to us for $1. And if you don't," he gestured toward the cliff, "accidents happen." Marcus struggled, but there were too many hands holding him. They dragged him to the very edge where the rock dropped away into darkness. One push and he'd fall 400 feet to the rocks below. "Last chance," the scarred man said. "Cooperate or drop." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Ethan, of the promise he'd made to do the right thing, of the keepers who'd died protecting what he'd found. He opened his mouth to refuse, to tell them to go to hell, when a new sound cut through the night. Sirens. Lots of them. Red and blue lights flashed from the road below. Sheriff Anderson's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the sheriff's department. Drop your weapons and step away from that man." The hands holding Marcus loosened. The scarred man cursed, looking around wildly. His people started backing away, some running for their trucks. "You set us up," he snarled at Marcus. "No," a new voice said from the darkness. "I did." Thomas emerged from the trees, a satellite phone in his hand. "Called them the moment I saw your trucks coming up the mountain. Been watching this place every night since the threats started." Anderson and 4 deputies came up the path, weapons drawn. Within minutes, the treasure hunters were in handcuffs, being read their rights. The scarred man was shouting about lawyers and false arrest, but Anderson wasn't listening. The sheriff helped Marcus to his feet. "You okay?" Marcus nodded, still coughing from the tear gas. "How did you get here so fast?" "Been parked at the base of the mountain every night for a week. Figured something like this was coming." He looked at the arrested men with disgust. "Some of these boys I've known their whole lives. Guess greed makes strangers of us all." As the deputies loaded the prisoners into vehicles, Marcus sat on the hut's steps, trembling with adrenaline and relief. Thomas sat beside him, offering his flask again. This time, Marcus took it. "This isn't over," Thomas said quietly. "Donovan and his people, they're not going to stop. And now you've made enemies in town, too." "I know." "So what do you want to do?" Marcus thought about Ethan, about the vault full of stolen history, about the keepers who died protecting the truth, about who he wanted to be and what he wanted to teach his son. "I want to fight," he said. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I want to see this through." Thomas nodded slowly, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Then tomorrow, we call in the real weapons." "What weapons?" "The truth, Marcus. We go public. We show the world what's down there. And we let them decide what justice looks like." Marcus looked out at the valley spread below, dark except for scattered lights from distant homes. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping peacefully, unaware that beneath this mountain lay evidence that could rewrite history. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to a different world. Tomorrow, the secrets would end. The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Saturday in late December. Marcus stood in front of the Pinewood Ridge Community Center, microphone in hand, looking out at a crowd that had swelled to over 200 people. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed at him like weapons. Reporters from Denver, Salt Lake City, even a crew from a national network that had flown in overnight. Behind him stood Thomas, Sheriff Anderson, and 3 people Marcus had met only days before. Dr. Sarah Chen, a historian specializing in Western territorial theft, Joseph Redfeather, an elder from the Ute Mountain tribe, and Robert Huang, director of the Chinese American Historical Society of Colorado. Marcus's hands shook as he unfolded his notes. Ethan stood in the front row, giving him a thumbs up. The boy had insisted on being there, despite Marcus's concerns about safety. "We started this together," Ethan had said. "We finish it together." Marcus cleared his throat and began. "My name is Marcus Brennan. 3 months ago, I bought a piece of property for $800 that everyone said was worthless. What I found beneath that property is worth $265 million, but that's not why I'm here today." The crowd leaned in, cameras clicking. "I'm here because what I found isn't just treasure, it's evidence. Evidence of systematic theft spanning 5 decades. Evidence that was gathered and hidden by a group called the Keepers of the Last Light, people who risked their lives to preserve truth that powerful individuals wanted buried." He gestured to the people behind him. "These experts have spent the last 2 weeks documenting what's in the vault beneath my property, and today we're going to show the world what they found." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her laptop connected to a projector. Images appeared on the screen behind them. The first showed the entrance to the vault, stone steps descending into darkness. The second showed rows of containers, meticulously labeled. The third showed gold coins spread across a table, gleaming under laboratory lights. "What Mr. Brennan discovered," Dr. Chen said, her voice clear and professional, "is the most significant find in American historical preservation. The vault contains documented evidence of land fraud, mineral rights theft, and cultural artifact seizure dating from 1867 to 1923. More images flashed on the screen. Indigenous pottery and ceremonial items, Chinese jade carvings and personal effects, photographs of families long dead, legal documents bearing official seals. Every item has been catalogued," Dr. Chen continued. "Every piece of evidence has been verified. What we're looking at is proof of crimes that were committed with government complicity and covered up for over a century." Joseph Redfeather spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral pain. "My people have stories of what was taken from us, stories passed down through generations, land that was promised, then seized, sacred items that were stolen and sold to collectors. For 150 years, we've been told we had no proof, that our memories were unreliable, that we should accept what was done and move forward." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "Now we have proof, and we will not move forward. We will move toward justice." Robert Huang's testimony was equally powerful. The Chinese workers who built the railroads through these mountains were promised payment. They were promised land. They were promised citizenship. Instead, they were robbed, driven out, and in many cases, murdered. Their descendants scattered across the country, carrying stories of injustice with no way to prove what had been done. Until now. The press conference lasted 90 minutes. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed, and through it all, Marcus stood steady, answering honestly, deferring to the experts when appropriate, never claiming to be more than what he was. A man who'd stumbled into history and chose to honor it. When it was over, when the cameras finally stopped rolling and the reporters dispersed to file their stories, Marcus sat on the community center steps with Thomas. "You did good," the old man said. "It's just starting." "I know, but you took the first step. That's the hardest one." The response to the press conference was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the story had gone viral. News outlets across the country picked it up. Social media exploded with debate, support, and predictable conspiracy theories. The governor of Colorado issued a statement calling for a full investigation. The Department of the Interior announced they were sending a team to assess the find. and tribal nations from across the West reached out, wanting to be part of the process. But not everyone was pleased. Richard Donovan and the Western Historical Preservation Society filed an emergency injunction attempting to seize the property. They claimed Marcus had contaminated the site by allowing unauthorized access and that the artifacts were in danger. A judge denied the injunction within 48 hours, citing the documentation already completed and the presence of credentialed experts. The scarred man and his accomplices, arrested for assault and attempted theft, started talking. They named names, revealed connections. It turned out they'd been hired by a shell corporation connected to families who'd profited from the original thefts, people whose great-grandfathers had stolen land and built fortunes on fraud, people who had everything to lose if the truth came out. Federal prosecutors got involved, grand juries were convened, and slowly, methodically, a case began to build that reached far beyond a mountain vault in Colorado. Through it all, Marcus worked. He spent 18-hour days in the vault with teams of archaeologists, historians, and conservators. Every item was photographed, measured, documented. The gold and silver were assayed. The documents were digitized. The artifacts were catalogued with such precision that their journey from original owners to the vault could be traced with certainty. Dr. Chen led the effort, but she insisted Marcus be involved in every decision. "This is your discovery," she told him. "You have the right to be part of the process." But Marcus was learning that discovery came with responsibility. Media attention meant constant interviews. Legal proceedings meant depositions and court appearances. And protection of the site meant security measures that turned the peaceful cliff into something resembling a military installation. The state provided guards. The FBI sent agents. Thomas coordinated with the remaining keepers to ensure the site's integrity. And Ethan, incredibly, became something of a spokesman for his generation, doing interviews about what it meant to choose integrity over easy wealth. "My dad could have sold all this and we'd be rich," Ethan told one reporter. "But being rich isn't the same as being right. And I'd rather have a father I'm proud of than a mansion I'm ashamed of." The interview went viral. Marcus watched it on his phone, sitting in the hut late one night, and wept with pride. The legal framework for distributing the treasure took 6 months to establish. It required cooperation between federal agencies, state governments, tribal nations, and international organizations. Lawyers worked around the clock drafting agreements. Historians verified claims. And slowly, a plan emerged. The foundation was called the Keeper's Legacy Trust. Its mission was simple: return what was stolen, compensate descendants of victims, and preserve the evidence for future generations. Marcus sat on the board alongside Joseph Redfeather, Robert Huang, Dr. Chen, Thomas, and representatives from the Department of Justice. Together, they made decisions about every piece of treasure, every artifact, every document. The gold coins minted before 1890 were returned to tribal nations whose mineral rights had been stolen. The silver from Chinese worker wages went to the Chinese American Historical Society to create scholarships and cultural programs. Land deeds were researched, and in cases where original families could be traced, the land was returned or compensation provided. The artifacts, every single one, went back to the communities they'd been taken from. Ceremonies were held. Elders wept. And items that hadn't been seen in a century returned home. Marcus attended as many return ceremonies as he could. Each one deepened his understanding of what the keepers had protected. He stood in a small community center in southern Utah as a sacred pipe bundle was returned to the Ute people, watching elderly women touch it with trembling hands, tears streaming down weathered faces. The pipe had been taken from their great-great-grandmothers in 1882. Now, after 140 years, it was home. "My grandmother told me about this," one woman said, her voice barely a whisper. She said someday the spirits would return what was stolen. I never believed her. I thought it was just a story we told ourselves to feel better about what we'd lost. She looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much hardship. Thank you for believing when we couldn't. Marcus couldn't speak. He just nodded, throat too tight for words. In San Francisco, he attended a ceremony where Chinese railroad worker photographs and personal effects were formally transferred to the community museum. Robert Huang introduced him to a woman in her 80s named Linda Wong. My great-grandfather built the railroad through your mountain, she said. He saved everything he earned for 3 years. They promised him land when the work was done. Instead, they drove him out with violence. He died in poverty in 1903, believing his family's sacrifice meant nothing. She held up a photograph Marcus recognized from the vault. A young man standing beside railroad tracks, pick in hand, face solemn and strong. This is him. This is my great-grandfather. For my whole life, this picture existed only in stories. My grandmother described it to my mother. My mother described it to me, but we thought it was lost forever. Linda's hands shook as she held the frame. You gave him back to us. You gave us proof that he existed, that he mattered, that what was done to him was wrong. These moments, more than any monetary value, showed Marcus what he'd really found in that mountain. Not treasure, not fortune, but stolen pieces of people's souls, waiting to be made whole again. But the foundation also acknowledged Marcus's role. A finder's fee was established, 10% of the total value, carefully structured to avoid tax complications and ensure long-term security. $26.5 million. More money than Marcus had ever imagined. More than he knew what to do with. He gave half of it away immediately. To Pinewood Ridge for infrastructure and economic development. To programs supporting veterans and single parents. To scholarships for kids like Ethan who needed a chance. The rest he put in trust. Enough to ensure Ethan's education. Enough to rebuild his life. Enough to never be desperate again. But he kept the hut. And the land. Because some things weren't for sale. The transformation of Pinewood Ridge began that spring. The cliff hut and the vault beneath it were declared a National Historic Site. The state provided funding for a museum and visitor center. Trails were improved. A parking area was constructed at the base of the mountain. Marcus oversaw the construction, working alongside crews to ensure the site's integrity was maintained. The hut itself was restored to how it would have looked when Elias Crane lived there, with interpretive displays explaining the keepers and their mission. The vault became a guided tour, limited to small groups to preserve the artifacts that remained on display. Not all of them, most had been returned to their rightful owners, but enough to tell the story, to show visitors what had been hidden and why. The museum opened in July, 18 months after Marcus first lifted that iron ring. The ceremony drew thousands of people. Tribal leaders performed blessings. Descendants of Chinese railroad workers laid flowers at a memorial, and Marcus, standing before another crowd of cameras, cut the ribbon. This place represents a choice, he said in his speech. A choice between profit and principle, between easy and right. My great-great-grandfather might have walked these mountains. Maybe he knew Elias Crane. Maybe he didn't. But the choice Crane made, to protect truth instead of exploit it, that choice echoes through generations. He looked at Ethan, now 17, standing tall and proud beside him. We all face moments where we have to choose what kind of people we want to be. I was desperate when I bought this land. Broke. Scared, looking for salvation in $800 worth of rotting wood. What I found instead was purpose. The crowd was silent, listening. The treasure was never really about money. It was about what we're willing to fight for, what we're willing to protect, what we're willing to return, even when keeping it would be easier. He paused, looking up at the hut perched on its cliff, windows gleaming in the summer sun. This mountain taught me that the greatest treasures aren't the ones you keep. They're the ones you give back. The economic impact on Pinewood Ridge was profound. Within a year, the population had grown from 800 to 1,200. New businesses opened, restaurants, hotels, guide services. The school expanded. Young families moved in, drawn by jobs and opportunity. Old Man Henderson opened a cafe serving coffee and homemade pie to tourists. Ruth Ann's hardware store doubled in size. Even Patricia Mills, the real estate agent who'd sold Marcus the hut, saw her business boom as property values climbed. The town that had been dying found new life, and it all traced back to a desperate carpenter who'd refused to take the easy path. Marcus hired locally whenever possible. The museum staff of 15 included people who'd been unemployed for years. Former miners became tour guides, their knowledge of underground systems invaluable. Teachers who'd been laid off when the school shrank found new positions in the education department. Even some of the men who'd initially opposed Marcus, who'd wanted him gone, eventually came around and found honest work at the site. One of them, a man named Dale, who'd been at that town meeting voting against Marcus, approached him 6 months after the museum opened. "I owe you an apology," Dale said, hat in his hands. "I thought you were just another outsider trying to get rich off our town. I didn't understand what you were trying to do." Marcus shook his hand. "You were protecting your home. I get it. Still, I was wrong, and I'm grateful. My daughter, she got one of those scholarships you funded. She's going to college in the fall. First person in our family ever." Dale's voice cracked. "That's because of you." "That's because of what was in the mountain," Marcus corrected gently. "I just made sure it got to the right people." But success brought its own challenges. Thomas died 2 years after the museum opened, peacefully in his sleep at age 76. He'd lived long enough to see his grandfather's mission completed. Long enough to know the keepers hadn't died in vain. Marcus spoke at his funeral, voice breaking as he described how Thomas had welcomed him into something bigger than himself. How the old man had taught him that heritage wasn't just about blood. It was about values passed down, choices honored, promises kept. He was the last of the original keepers, Marcus said, but he wasn't the last keeper, because everyone who chooses truth over comfort, justice over profit, who stands up when it's easier to stay silent, they're keepers too. And that legacy doesn't end. It grows. They buried Thomas on the mountain, in a plot overlooking the valley he'd protected his entire life. His headstone bore the symbol of the keepers, a circle with radiating lines representing light breaking through darkness. Beside his grave, they erected a monument listing the names of all the original keepers, people who'd died protecting the vault. Elias Crane's name was first, Thomas's was last, and between them, 43 others who'd given their lives to preserve truth. The legal battles continued for years. Donovan's organization eventually dissolved under the weight of fraud investigations. Several prominent families were forced to make restitution for wealth built on stolen land. And slowly, painfully, a reckoning occurred that reshaped how America understood its own history. Marcus gave countless interviews, testified before congressional committees, and became an unlikely advocate for historical justice. But he always returned to the mountain, to the hut, to the place where his life had changed. Ethan graduated high school with honors and chose to study history and museum curation. "Someone needs to tell these stories right," he said. "Might as well be me." He worked at the museum every summer, leading tours, explaining the keeper's mission to visitors from around the world. And watching him, Marcus felt a pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. Father and son grew closer through the process in ways Marcus hadn't thought possible. The work gave them shared purpose, shared language. They spent evenings discussing how to present certain artifacts, debating the ethics of display versus repatriation, planning educational programs. One night, as they sat on the hut's porch watching stars emerge over the valley, Ethan said something that stayed with Marcus forever. "Dad, do you remember that night in the truck when we were living out of it, before you bought this place?" Marcus nodded. He'd tried to forget those months, but they were seared into his memory. "I was so angry at you then," Ethan admitted. "I blamed you for losing the house, for Mom leaving, for everything being so hard. I thought you'd failed us." Marcus's chest tightened. "I know, son. But I was wrong. You didn't fail. You just refused to compromise who you were, even when it would have been easier, even when it cost you everything." Ethan turned to look at his father, eyes bright. "Finding this treasure, giving it back, that wasn't out of character for you. That was exactly who you've always been. I just wasn't old enough to see it." Marcus couldn't speak. He pulled his son into an embrace, both of them holding on tight against the mountain wind. "I'm proud to be your son," Ethan whispered, "not because of what you found, because of what you chose." One evening, 5 years after the discovery, Marcus sat alone on the cliff edge as the sun set over the valley. The museum had closed for the day. The tourists had gone. It was just him and the mountain and the memories of everything that had happened here. He thought about the man he'd been when he first arrived. Desperate, broken, willing to gamble $800 on a place everyone said was worthless. He'd been looking for shelter, for survival. What he'd found was purpose. His phone buzzed, a text from Ethan, now at college in Boulder. "Hey, Dad, just finished my thesis proposal. It's about the keepers, about how ordinary people can change history if they're brave enough to try. My professor loved it. Thanks for showing me what that looks like." Marcus smiled, typing back, "Proud of you, son. Always." He pocketed the phone and stood, stretching muscles that were older now but stronger than they'd been in years. The hut behind him glowed with solar-powered lights, welcoming and warm. Inside, displays told a story that had almost been lost forever. Marcus walked to the entrance, pausing at the door. Above it, carved into new timber, were words he'd chosen himself. "The worthy shall find what was hidden from the wicked." Elias Crane's promise, preserved. He went inside, moving through the museum he'd helped create. Photographs lined the walls, images of artifacts being returned to tribal elders, ceremonies of reconciliation, families reunited with their heritage. Each picture told a story of healing, of justice delayed but not denied. In the center of the main room stood a glass case containing Crane's journal, opened to a page Marcus had memorized. "We do this work not for recognition or reward, but because some truths are too important to die in darkness. Future generations will judge us not by the wealth we accumulated, but by the integrity we preserved." Marcus had been judged by the media, by historians, by people who thought he was foolish to give away a fortune. But the only judgment that mattered came from himself and his son, and both of them could look in the mirror without shame. The museum director, a woman named Angela, who'd been hired to run daily operations, poked her head into the room. "Thought I saw your truck still here. Working late? Just thinking." She smiled. "We had 400 visitors today. Biggest Saturday yet. There's a school group coming Monday from Arizona, and next month we're hosting that international conference on repatriation." Marcus nodded. The museum had become more than he'd imagined. A destination, a learning center, a place where people from around the world came to understand what justice looked like when ordinary people refused to accept injustice. "Angela, do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd just kept quiet? If I'd sold everything on the black market and disappeared?" She considered the question carefully. I think you wouldn't be standing here. I think Pinewood Ridge would still be dying. I think thousands of people would still be searching for proof of what was stolen from their families. She met his eyes. And I think you'd be miserable. Rich, maybe, but miserable. He laughed. You're probably right. After Angela left, Marcus descended into the vault one final time before heading home. The underground chambers were lit now, carefully illuminated to show the scope of what the keepers had built. Tour groups walked these passages daily, but at night, alone, Marcus could still feel the presence of everyone who'd worked here. He stood in the main vault chamber, now mostly empty, its treasures returned to their rightful owners. Only displays remained, explaining what had been here and where it had gone. The master record, Crane's ledger, was in a climate-controlled case, its pages preserved for future study. Marcus placed his hand on the stone wall, feeling the tool marks left by men who died more than a century ago. I kept my promise, he whispered. Your work mattered. Your sacrifice meant something. The mountain was silent, but Marcus felt a peace settle over him that he'd never experienced before. Not the peace of wealth or comfort, but something deeper. The peace of knowing he'd honored something greater than himself. He climbed back to the surface, locked the vault entrance, now a secure door with electronic systems, and walked to his truck. The drive down the mountain was familiar now, every curve and turn mapped in his muscle memory. His house, the one he'd built with his share of the finder's fee, sat on 10 acres at the edge of town. Not a mansion. Just a solid, well-made home with room for Ethan when he visited, and space for Marcus to work on carpentry projects in his shop. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the warm lights glowing through the windows. Inside, his life waited. Simple, honest, earned. The path from desperate carpenter to historical figure hadn't been straight. There had been moments when he'd doubted himself, moments when the easy choice beckoned like a siren song, but he'd had help. Thomas, Ethan, people in the community who'd believed in him, and he'd had the example of Elias Crane, a man he'd never met, but whose values had reached across 150 years to guide him. Marcus got out of the truck and walked to his door. Tomorrow, he'd go back to the museum. He'd lead tours, answer questions, and continue the work of education and reconciliation. It was his job now, his calling, the thing he woke up excited to do. But tonight, he'd rest. He'd cook a simple dinner, maybe call Ethan to hear about his day, and sit on his porch watching the stars emerge over the mountains. People often asked him if he regretted giving away the fortune, if he wished he'd kept more for himself, and his answer was always the same. I got exactly what I needed: a purpose, a clean conscience, and a son who knows his father chose right over easy. That, Marcus had learned, was worth more than all the gold in the mountain. The years had taught him many things. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That integrity wasn't what you did when people were watching, but what you did when no one would ever know. That the greatest legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in the values you passed down and the lives you touched. The cliff hut that everyone said was worthless had given him all of that and more. It had given him redemption. Marcus Brennan had paid $800 for a crumbling structure on a dangerous cliff. What he'd really bought was a chance to become the man he was meant to be. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all. Anyone can find wealth if they're lucky enough to stumble across it, but it takes courage to find purpose, strength to choose integrity, and wisdom to know that some things are worth far more than money. As the stars wheeled overhead and the mountain stood eternal against the sky, Marcus understood the final lesson the keepers had left behind. The light doesn't go out when one person dies. It passes to the next, and the next carried forward by anyone brave enough to hold it. He'd been that person. And somewhere, someday, someone else would be too. The last light burned on, and it always would. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering the truth. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe courage and integrity still matter in a world that values profit over principle.